Hey, good day, everyone, and thank you for joining us for episode number 30 of Unsung Heroes of the Cloud, where today we are joined by Shreya, who will be showing us some Python Azure functions in the V2 programming model. And with that, I want to say, Shreya, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk to everyone about the new programming model.
Well, I'm very excited to learn more about it because I don't even know what the new programming model is about. But before we talk about programming, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you calling in from today?
Yeah, so I'm calling in from Austin, Texas. Generally really hot, but the temperature has dropped very significantly this last week. So I'd say it's pretty cold.
So, what is cold for Austin, Texas? I wonder.
Ooh, it's actually really cold. It's like 50s right now, low 50s.
Okay, so living in California, I can empathize that low 50s, which is like about 10 degrees Celsius, is cold. But I'm heading to Colorado next week, and the daily high will be 40. So there's different degrees of cold, I believe.
That's true. I guess in Austin, like since it's usually like above 100 and then like all of a sudden it's like cut in half. That's how it felt. But as I was saying
Yeah,
it, I knew there's colder places and there's no snow right now, so that's nice.
yes, that's definitely nice. And what do you like to do for fun in Austin?
Yeah, so recently I've been taking more yoga classes. So I've just been trying to learn the different poses and trying to bring like that practice and do a little bit more mindfulness and meditation. So that's been kind of my new hobby these days.
Okay, that sounds very cool. And is there any specific type of yoga that you follow?
I really enjoyed like more of heated yoga classes and also yoga classes that combine cardio as well. So it's a little bit more upbeat as well. But honestly, I'm just really learning and I'm open to trying anything. So Austin has so many like cool local yoga
Hmm.
studios and things. So I've just been like, taking my time exploring the different options.
Okay, and have you done what's the heated yoga called? Is it Bikram yoga?
I believe Bikram's the type of yoga, and there's also vinyasa as well when it comes to heated. I'm still learning for sure, but those are the ones I know too.
Okay. Yeah. I can tell you a little fun anecdote about my wife and I went to yoga a couple of years ago, and I am not as flexible as my wife. And at some point during the yoga classes, she was actually making fun of me for not being able to do the poses as well as she did. But hey, I was there, so showing up is half the work, isn't it?
I agree. That's hilarious. But yeah, I think the cool thing I've noticed about the classes I'm in is like everyone's on such a different level. So there's definitely like experts, but then there's people like me who are just learning for the first time, and it's nice to like be in that environment to be motivated to be better, but then also like happy kind of where you are.
Yes, and you mentioned something about motivated to being better. Is that what the new programming model is all about as well?
Yes, it is actually. Great segue. So, yeah, the new programming model for functions using Python is all about being more idiomatic, more Pythonic for customers who are already developing in Python. But before I really go into the details of the programming model, I'd love to actually talk a little bit about Azure Functions
Hmm.
for any people who are not familiar right now. So, just briefly, Functions is an event driven service and it provides compute on demand. When you're using functions, you can essentially run code and different items of logic by triggering different events. And the main goal of functions is really to allow you to deploy your code, focus on your code, and let the rest be taken care of for you. Functions also offers many out-of-the-box features like extensive monitoring and observability, and this really makes it a great, well-supported solution that's super easy to get started with. And I really hope I can share how easy it is to get started through this conversation today. So, I want to also go over a couple of common use cases and scenarios where our customers are using functions just to better paint a picture of really what functions can do for you. So, in this first example here, I have a database that needs to be cleaned or deduplicated based on some business logic. And we're having a function code that's running every 15 minutes on a schedule or a timer to make sure that this logic can be run and the code can be cleaned as needed. And every 15 minutes, we have now a deduplicated database as we like it to be. So in this scenario, we're using the function to run this logic that I've described. And
Okay.
then, yeah, so, and then if you could just go to the next slide. And then another common example is real-time stream processing. So here we're starting with this app or this device that's producing a lot of data. And our end goal is to be able to use this data for some sort of dashboard visualization, so we can visualize it and make analysis and see the data in a different format. And as you can see in this workflow, we're using a function to process and ingest that data, taking it from an event hub to putting it into a Cosmos database. So with the function, we're putting this data in an area where it can now be used for visualizations and such. So this is also a common example of when customers are using our function service. And then if we just go to the next slide. I also just want to call out that Functions is an open source project. So it's across about 10 different repositories. You can definitely take a look. We have all the work that we're doing in the future kind of published within issues and tracked in GitHub itself. So you're welcome to take a look. This is all available to the public.
And so, if I can just ask here, so you're doing something similar to what the AKS team is doing in also working in the public. So you're not only just you don't just have the repo available for people to use, but also you work with GitHub issues where everybody that has a question or an issue can actually come up and do a direct feature request to the product team.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what it is, and we try to respond to each of the issues. And if it's prioritized, you can see when it's prioritized for in the sprints. We also have a lot of discussions. We have one for the conversation about the model as well. So we're really, really excited always to hear any feedback, and GitHub's a great way to get in touch with the product team.
Okay, absolutely. I'm a huge fan of such model because it brings customers very close to the product team and it gives a direct circle of feedback.
Yeah, I agree. Awesome. Yeah. So with that, I also want to go into a little bit more depth. So I know I just described some higher level examples of when one might use functions, but I also want to go into the programming model and the crux of really what a function is. So here we see like these three components of a function, and I'll start with a trigger, right? So the trigger is what invokes the function and causes it to run. So this could be a timer. So every 15 minutes, as we saw earlier, we have something running. It could also be based on an event. So when an event is received, we want to do a certain flow of events or a certain flow of actions. So trigger is really the part of the function that invokes it, it starts it. And this would be like a crucial part of the function as well. The next two aspects are optional, the input and the output binding. So an input binding is different from the trigger because it doesn't start the function or cause the function, but it is data or a source of information that can be used by the function code itself. And in contrast, the output binding is where we deliver any logic that needs to be posted, and that would exist in an outside source as well. So in the
And
previous, oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, if you don't mind me asking a question here, in the example with Event Hub, was the trigger and the input bound binding, were they the same or should I still look at them differently?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. Do you mind just going to the last slide?
Yeah,
The
sure.
event hub slide? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so over here, so we see the function, the event hub is actually going to be the trigger because when there is new events, then we'd want to run the function. And then the output binding would be the Cosmos database. So in this case, we don't have an input binding, we just have a trigger and an output binding. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. So in this case, there's no input binding, but just trigger and outputs.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And then if you don't mind going back one more slide,
Oh,
I'd love to talk about the SQL one as well. So here we have the automation of scheduled tasks. And in this example, we'll see that the trigger is actually like, it's not pictured here, it's a timer, it's a schedule. So every 15 minutes, that would be the trigger. That's when the function would run. But the input binding would be this database as well as the output binding as well.
okay. Yeah. Makes total sense.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah. So, the reason I really want to go over this programming model is because this is the crux and the core of what a function is. And then when we go into the whole hierarchy of functions, we actually see that there are multiple functions within a function app. So, a function app, or also called a function project, contains multiple functions that are in this format. So, there could be like dozens of functions, there could just be one function, but they're all contained within this function app. So you
Okay.
might be okay, awesome. Yeah, so you might be wondering, like I've talked about this V2 programming model, like what does that mean? Is this going to change? And the answer is no. So this kind of simplified diagram is really the core of functions, no matter what language you're using or what programming model you're using. This is kind of how we've structured the functions to be. When I refer to the programming model, I'm really talking about how many files you have, what files you have, what code you're writing. Those are kind of the things that will change, but this underlying experience when it comes to the crux will stay the same. And if you've used functions before, then you'd also keep all the things related to debugging and deployment. All of that stuff would also remain the same. It's really just how you interact and develop the function that's going to change, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And so what's different in the version 2?
Yes. So if you just go to the next slide. Thank you. So there's a few different features that I do want to gloss over. We have many different things that are new, but these I think are some of the most important. So first, we see a simplified folder structure. So again, if you've used functions before, you might be familiar with the current programming model in Python, the V1 model. Whenever you create a new function within a function app, you actually have a new folder created for you with two different files that are required. So if you had three functions in your function app, you would now have three folders and six files across those folders for those functions. But with the V2 model, we've simplified it such that multiple functions can actually be defined in a single file. So those six files would be replaced with just one file. And this is hopefully going to make it less overwhelming. If you've just started using functions, there's just one file kind of to figure out what to do with. And this kind of brings me to my next point, which is that decorators are going to be introduced as well when it comes to the concepts of triggers and bindings. So before, with the V1 model, we had this function.json configuration file in which all of the configuration for triggers and bindings was kept. So this was really where all those properties were kept as well, and it was a required file per function. But now we're just going to be replacing that entire file with a single decorator that's going to now establish and define the same information. And our hope with this approach is, that decorators are really in alignment with Python developers' well-known frameworks as well. So we really do want to see that alignment, make it more intuitive for customers as they're developing in Python versus creating a function app. And then the last one, which is actually my favorite one to talk about, is easier to access documentation. So we've added some new avenues when it comes to accessing documentation. One of them includes IntelliSense, which is going to give you hints as you type. So whether you're a new or an existing customer, it's really helpful to get those hints to know exactly which arguments to use, not having to cross-reference any other documentation. So we're hoping that's going to increase productivity for our customers. And another feature that we've also added is this ability to preview templates in VS Code. So currently in VS Code, if you go in, you may not have the option to see the code before you click on the template to use. But now you can view those code snippets, you can view additional information about the trigger, all within the IDE itself. So without even leaving the IDE, you kind of have this at your fingertips. And again, we hope that this is going to make customers feel more productive as well.
Okay, cool. And one question that I had with everything you shared, and specifically on the decorators, was how do you deal with secrets now in the version 2 of the programming model?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it hasn't changed much because in the function app itself, we have this file called local settings.json, and that's where you'd store the connection strings, or that's where you'd configure how you want to associate with different accounts using your function. So that's going to stay the same, the local settings aspect. And then when you're in your file where you're establishing the decorator, you would use the name of the connection string just like you would in function.json.
Okay, and then that's for local development, and then in once you're in deployed in Azure, you have the app settings in the portal that you can then use to either hard code your string or even link it to a key vault, I suppose.
Correct. Yes. So
Yep.
that experience wouldn't change at all.
Okay. Cool. That's very good to hear. You have a demo to show us?
I do. Okay. So I'm going to start off by sharing my screen and just showing you all what the experience would look like if you went in today and created a new app with the V2 programming model. So currently we are in preview, so you are able to use the VS Code extension to create a V2 programming model. So if you take a look here, I just want to go through some of the files that you would see upon creating this. So the first one is the function app.py file, and this is going to be the file that's the entry point. It's going to contain all those functions that we talked about earlier as well. So you can go ahead and look in here. We just have it set up for you when you first create the function, but there is also this sample code for an HTTP trigger that you can uncomment out and run as well. So I'm just actually going to do that right here. So yeah, if you were to create one right now and then go in and want to be able to test it out, you can just start off by uncommenting the code and then saying front post start. And then as the function runs, I also want to talk about some of the other files we have here. So we have this getting started file, which is really going to give you a glimpse of what is required for functions. And also like if you want to access more documentation, we have links in there as well. We also have the host.json file, which is going to have some app level configuration as well. And then we have our local settings.json, which is kind of what we talked about earlier. This is going to have properties that are used for local development, including app settings and connection strings as well. And then lastly, we also have this requirements.txt file, which is going to have some Azure packages some packages that we want to bring to Azure upon deployment. And it's just running. Sorry, with all the softwares running on my machine, it takes a second.
And I see that you're running Rosetta, so are you now running this on an M1 MacBook Pro?
I am, yes. So, as many of our customers may be aware, right now for Python we don't have support for ARM64 out of the box. So that's why I'm using Rosetta. I'm doing an x86 simulation. However, we are currently working on providing that support for our customers for ARM64. That is a priority for us, given that our customers do often use Macs. But this is also a good workaround. And I also want to call out that once we release Python 3.10, that's going to have ARM64 support kind of out of the box. So we will be seeing that, and that's anticipated for the end of the month. So that will be some good news.
Yes, definitely. I have this. I have similar struggles with different tools. I also have a M1 MacBook Pro, and
Mhm.
it's a fantastic machine. But there's just every couple of weeks there is this one thing that doesn't work or that requires an x86 thing. So it keeps up popping up left and right.
Yes, I agree. And I think like as we go on, and I think more and more things are going to have that support. But yes, right
Yes.
now there is that difference. So as you can see, we have the trigger has run as expected. And if I just go in and type the URL in my machine, you'll see here that it is running as expected. So I really just want to emphasize how easy it is for you to get started. If you're interested in creating a function, if you're interested in testing this out, you can go in today and just really out of the box be able to configure this app to run right away. And I did actually, excuse me, forget one thing that I wanted to call out as well. Um, a storage account is also required for a function app to run. So if you go into your local settings.json, you can actually configure this with either a connection string or you're using a local storage emulator. That's what I'm doing.
Okay.
I'm using Azurite, which is also included with VS Code. So either way, that would be the one other prereq before you run your function. And then I know at the end we're going to be giving you a link, which is the aka.ms/Python programming model link. That's going to have comprehensive quick starts for both VS Code and for the command line if you're interested in following that along as well.
Okay.
Awesome. And then I did want to share one more example. That's okay.
Oh, we love demos. That is definitely okay to show a second one.
Awesome. Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So here I have a Flask app. So if you happen to use Flask or any other frameworks like Fast API as well, um, you can actually go ahead and use that with your function app. So the steps would be such that you take that app. So here I have a sample Flask app, which is a Hello World app, very simple. And I've taken that Flask app and I've placed it inside my repository for this function app as well. And then I've gone ahead in my function app.py file and just written this one line of code, which is a wrapper for that Flask app, as well as imported the Flask app. And by doing these things, as well as adding this root prefix to my host.json, I'm actually able to get my Flask app running in a function, as you can see here. I just ran it first because I wasn't sure how long it was going to take. But I really also like just love talking about this feature because if you already have code that you're using, you can actually bring it to a function app very quickly by just taking these few steps and having that Hello World or more complex Flask app be running on a function app itself. And
Okay.
yeah, that's kind of all I have for you in the demo. But please do try it out. Let me know what you all think. We're looking for a lot of feedback. And then when it comes to the link that I had mentioned before, we have a discussion open on GitHub as well, where we'd love to hear any feedback that you all have.
Yep. This looks really neat, and as you showed us, it is super easy to get started with the new programming model for Azure Functions. So I echo what you're saying, given that a lot of the work is being done out in the open. Everybody who's watching this, please head on over to GitHub, check out all of the issues, or if you run into an issue yourself, just go to GitHub, open one, and as you heard here today, the product team is actually actively listening to you.
Awesome.
And
Yep.
with that, Shreya, I want to say thank you for coming on. This was fantastic, where you showed us all about the V2 programming model in Python. And for those of you who have watched up till this point, thank you for staying with us, and we'll see you after Thanksgiving. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.